filling the pages. Luther is one of those. He was born in Laban, what we would call Germany, but the Holy Roman Empire. His father wanted him to grow up to be a lawyer, and so he sent him to college. Martin Luther, unfortunately, for his father's sake, was always interested in things like philosophy and morality, and like with the and so quickly left his studies as a lawyer and decided to follow his studies in the area of philosophy and religion. This was an interesting deal in Martin Luther's life because it was Martin Luther who really found out that well, this track is really off here. Martin Luther discovered that as a young man there was no certainty in all of this, and so he found out that it was really okay to deal with many things like this, and so Martin Luther went on to be a monk. And can you hear me?
What?
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Messed up?
Yeah. I didn't. I gotta cut it down because I'm like, it's gonna be way too long. So I gotta trim. So I'll go back and do it again. I was going to tell how it was born as a its village. They tend to come from everyday people that live in these apartments. Martin is one of those people. He was a common everyday guy, born in Eisleben, Germany, to parents who wanted to become a lawyer. He trained to be a monk, a religious scholar, or a friar. Amidst that training, that Martin Luther's personal struggle began to develop. He struggled with the idea of God and earning his God. Martin Luther was a man who always took things to the degree that they had to be done completely. And so, as a result of that, many hours of prayer, fasting, pilgrimage, any kind of religious activity he could find to make himself available to God and earning his favor. In the midst of all this, Martin Luther was a professor at a place called Wittenberg. After he finished his studies, he decided to involve himself in teaching. And one day, he tacked his lectures to the wall. Again, a common, everyday thing. Those lectures that we now know as the 95 Theses were tacked to the wall at Wittenberg door. It was much like a professor would post his PowerPoint slides for the next day's lecture on a website. Martin Luther posted it on the door of his classroom. Those 95 Theses changed history. And this common, everyday man named Martin, when he posted those 95 Theses to the wall, Martin Luther was simply posting his lecture notes for the next day. Now, granted, those lecture notes took to task the church of the day for selling things like indulgences and for making penance and human effort. I don't know. Yeah. Mm. It had been 1,500 years since the birth of Christ. And somehow this institution that Jesus had left behind to the story of God's love for humanity had gotten really messed up. And Martin Luther knew that. And he understood the nature of that. And so when he wrote on these 95 Theses, he wrote a story about God's redemptive love, about how important it was to understand that it was by faith alone, it was by grace alone, it was by Christ alone, it was by Scripture alone, and that there were no higher authority than the Bible, that there was no human institution called the church that could sell indulgences or that could sell penances and allow people to earn their relationship with God. This was a tragic time for Martin Luther because it brought him face to face with the enemies he now knew as the Holy Roman Empire and the Holy Catholic Church. These enemies brought Martin Luther to the Diet of Worms, and it was there that he was tried as a heretic and his life was threatened. This story is a story of a man who understood what it was like to stand on some eternally valuable principles that we know as moving from earner to heir. Martin Luther's story is our story because he was a common man, an everyday kind of guy who found himself thrust into a situation where the very principles of God were put to test, not just in his mind, but in his heart. And what I love about Martin Luther is that he staked his very life on these principles. Let's take a look into the life of Martin Luther.
No, I think we're good.
That's some good shots there. You need to get rid of those blue jeans.
I know what you're doing. Horse and buggy guy. You're trying to get away from us, but you can't.
People aren't letting him go by.
Okay.
Of course, I wonder if it was seen from